Chicago, the ABC Evening News with Frank Reynolds.
Good evening. The Democrats tonight begin their 1968 National Convention here in the Chicago stockyards. There is disagreement, disunity, and dissension all over the place. In Moscow, there are reports that the rulers of the Soviet Union and the leaders of Czechoslovakia have reached agreement on a settlement of their differences. We'll have a report via satellite later in this program. In the final hours before a convention opening, there are always almost as many rumors as there are delegates. By far, the most intriguing speculation to sweep this city today was the report of a new movement to draft Senator Edward Kennedy for the presidential nomination. But late this afternoon, Senator Kennedy asked that his name not be placed in nomination. A Kennedy aide said the senator had talked with former Governor Michael DeSalle of Ohio, who has been the chief backer of Senator Kennedy for the presidency. And DeSalle reportedly agreed to respect Senator Kennedy's wishes. He will not have the senator's name placed in nomination. Before Senator Kennedy's announcement late this afternoon, a two-room headquarters was opened in a downtown Chicago hotel, despite the senator's repeated insistence that he would not be a candidate for office this year. And Senator Philip Hart of Michigan had indicated earlier today he would like to see Senator Kennedy nominated for the top spot. But two powerful Democrats, Mayor Daley of Chicago and Jesse Unruh of California, said they were not involved in any draft Kennedy drive. Daley and Unruh held what was described as a very cordial meeting today. Unruh was one of the leading supporters of the late Senator Robert Kennedy, and Daley, of course, recently suggested that Edward Kennedy be on the national ticket. Also, the rumors were fed by the matter of what is now known as the Daley delay. Chicago's mayor had been expected to announce his choice for the nomination yesterday. Instead, he said he will not make his decision known until Wednesday, the day of the balloting. Vice President Humphrey is still the front runner here, way ahead of everybody else. Here is the latest ABC News projection of the first ballot on Wednesday night, with 1,312 votes needed for the nomination. Mr. Humphrey has 1,228, just 84 less than he needs for victory. Senator Eugene McCarthy, 690. Senator George McGovern, 116. Favorite sons and others, 588. The vice president, who is taking nothing for granted, today acted more like a man trying to come from behind than a front runner. He spoke to the Missouri and Ohio delegations and also addressed a meeting of labor leaders. Here is the vice president before the Missouri group. Well, I'm sorry, apparently we were unable to pick up what the vice president was saying. He told the Missouri group that he needed them. In his remarks to the Ohio delegation, he pointed out that Ohio could possibly put him over the top on the first ballot. Senator McCarthy's campaign manager, Blair Clark, said today, it has now become quite clear that the vice president will not win a first ballot nomination. McCarthy spent more than an hour today with Jesse Unruh, the leader of the California delegation. Unruh later told reporters that McCarthy has more support in California than any other candidate. California has 174 delegate votes, and all three major candidates will make a direct appeal for those votes tomorrow. The vice president, Senator McCarthy, and Senator McGovern will appear together at a meeting of the California delegation tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. California is important, and so is Illinois. As we said earlier, the leader of the Illinois delegation, Chicago's Mayor Daley, has not yet publicly committed himself to any candidate and will not until Wednesday. In a moment, a close look at the man his supporters call the greatest mayor in the country and his opponents call King Richard. The Democratic Credentials Committee has voted to seat all members of two Georgia delegations and split the state's 43 delegate votes evenly between the two factions. Georgia's party regulars were headed by Governor Lester Maddox until he resigned his position as a delegate earlier today in order to devote his full time to his candidacy for the presidential nomination. The rival Georgia slate is headed by Julian Bond, a Negro state representative. Today's Credentials Committee decision to split the delegate votes may be rejected by the Maddox group, which apparently does not want any compromise. The Credentials Committee also imposed a loyalty oath on Georgia delegates, requiring them to pledge not to support the candidate of another political party. These are some of the scheduled highlights of tonight's convention session. Democratic National Chairman John Bailey will open the convention. Welcoming addresses will be delivered by Chicago's Mayor Daley and Illinois' Governor Samuel Shapiro. There will also be a speech by Robert Weaver, Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. The keynote address will come from Senator Daniel Inouye of Hawaii. The Rules Committee Chairman, Governor Shapiro, will report on the temporary convention rules, and 4 floor fights are expected tonight, all involving the seating of delegates. The managers of the convention have decided there will be only 2 reporters from each network allowed on the convention floor. Now, that's half the customary minimum. ABC and the other networks are protesting this action as an attempt to manage the presentation of convention news. The Oregon delegation today adopted a resolution urging the convention and city officials to permit full television coverage of the convention and surrounding activities. One delegate said the limitations on floor coverage and coverage outside the hall here are something of a scandal. Well, as has been duly noted, security arrangements here are very thorough. Vice President Humphrey said today he does not like what he called the over-presence of police and the barbed wire barricade that has been erected around the convention hall. Still, despite the threat or possibility of serious disorders and a number of near-crippling labor disputes, the convention is here as scheduled. And it is here largely because of the determination and the political power of one man, Richard J. Daley. ABC's Hugh Hill reports on the mayor of the town.
Daley's power in the Democratic Party was born in the ranks of more than 10,000 city workers and office holders whose livelihood depends on the whims of the mayor. One of the fellow marchers in the parades Daley loves so well, a circuit judge from Chicago, says, "When Daley says you march, you march." That attitude is even more pronounced in the 50-man city council of Chicago, where Daley's word is unquestioned. Time and again, his huge majority stamps out approval of the plans and projects of the mayor. All are allowed to speak their mind, but always the majority prevails. The mayor often uses the podium to answer threats against his city.
They're not going to take over Chicago, and they're not going to take over any convention, and they're not going to take over any streets, and that goes for all of them. And I don't care how many of them come here or where they come from. We will permit them to carry on as American citizens, but none of them are going to take over Chicago, and I know you support me 100%.
Daley appreciates crowd approval, but he is no more vain than the next politician, and support from the party faithful has always been a two-way love affair. Daley knows what their numbers mean to him, and they know what his judgment has meant to them. The mayor is usually a serious man, especially when he talks of the profession of politics.
Politics is an honorable profession. It's a great vocation, and if carried out properly, the greatest satisfaction comes to men and women who will do a job for their fellow man and woman. And I would hope more and more young people, and particularly middle-aged fathers and mothers, would encourage their sons and daughters to enter politics, either on an elected level or appointed level, because no matter what we accomplish, we can have all the wealth that anyone could accumulate. We can have all the manufacturing skill or all the expertness in the science, but if we haven't got good people in our government, we haven't accomplished much, in my opinion.
The major flaw in Mayor Daley's understanding of urban life is his failure to communicate with the Negro ghetto. He's had 2 major riots in 3 years, the latest one when Dr. Martin Luther King was shot. And Daley was unhappy with the somewhat reserved police attitude.
I was disappointed to know that every policeman out on the beat was supposed to use his own decision. And this decision evidently was his. In my opinion, he should have had instructions to shoot arsonists and to shoot looters.
But in an interview a few days later, after the nationwide furor over his tough approach, the mayor exhibited a calmer attitude.
Anyone would be for that.
Mr. Mayor, have you changed your position, sir?
No, I said very expressly and very distinctly that all we wanted people to do is to
comply with the law, and that's all it is. And there wasn't any shoot-to-kill orders at all. This was the fabrication of a lot of other people and the interpretation of what I said.
Do you think you were misunderstood the other day, Mr.
Greatly.
Robert Kennedy once said about the Democratic nomination, Mayor Daley means the ballgame. Actually, he controls only the votes in Illinois. But he has risen high in national party ranks because of his ability to deliver this state and his steady loyalty.
And I don't care about the intellectuals. I don't care about the university professors who are assailing a man that's president. No one is more bitterly attacked than Lyndon B. Johnson, and we Democrats today are standing behind him. I know I am 100%.
There's been some talk of Mayor Daley becoming a vice presidential candidate, but he's 66, perhaps too old. He's in his fourth term as mayor of the city he loves. He says he wants nothing more. But if power is the sweet wine of politics, Mayor Daley's cup is full. This is Hugh Hill, ABC, Chicago.
Later in this program, guest commentator Ralph Schoenstein will have some further thoughts on Mayor Daley and Chicago. Reports from Moscow tonight say the Russians have agreed to recognize the liberal regime of Czechoslovakian reformer Alexander Dubček, and the troops of the 5 Warsaw Pact countries that invaded Czechoslovakia will be withdrawn gradually. 4 days of top-level talks between the leaders of Russia and Czechoslovakia appear to be coming to an end. The Czech spokesmen reportedly are to fly back to Prague soon, and a joint communique spelling out the agreement will then be issued. If indeed there is an agreement, it comes at a time of increasingly strained relations in Czechoslovakia between the occupying Soviet troops and the Czech people. Radio Free Prague reports that a 20-year-old girl has been shot by the Russians, and everywhere hostile words and angry looks are seen from Czechs in the streets. All over Czechoslovakia today, signs on highways leading east read, "To Moscow." And to make the meaning clear to the Soviet occupiers, some of the signs are printed in the Cyrillic alphabet used in Russia. All over the country, too, are signs in Czech and Russian and English, many of them saying, "Ivan, go home." The bad feeling between the Russians and the Czechs is shown in the following film from Czechoslovakia, film that was taken just a day or so ago and arrived in the United States late yesterday. ABC's Roger Grimsby narrates.
These scenes were filmed right at the start of the invasion last week, during the first violent resistance in Prague. This obviously caught a lot of Russian tank crews by surprise. We still don't know the extent of the damage or how many Russians were injured, but their retaliation was quick and it was merciless. Scores of buildings were gutted. Russian gunners hit a museum and at least one hospital in wild bursts. Resistance forces gained courage and they hit more and more tanks and armored cars. There are reports that the bitter resistance of the Czechs was a factor in the Russian willingness to compromise with the Dubček government. But tonight, the Russians sent more tank and infantry forces into the capital. They declared a special curfew and cleared Venceslas Square, where thousands of people had gathered to welcome their leaders returning from Moscow. The huge tanks patrol the now empty streets, where buses and trolleys had been used as barricades by the resistance. This is Roger Grimsby reporting.
In Vietnam, the heaviest fighting since May is going on these days, and senior American officers in Da Nang see no end to it. The U.S. command reports that more than 5,000 of the enemy were killed last week. Near Con Thien, just below the demilitarized zone, the Marines have surrounded more than 300 North Vietnamese regulars, have killed more than 50, and are said to be tightening the noose. The 4-day siege of the Green Beret camp at Duc Lop was lifted today. Before dawn, the last elements of a 2,000-man communist force slipped away toward Cambodia. More than 600 of the enemy died in that battle. Allied dead were listed as 6 members of the U.S. Special Forces team and some 50 South Vietnamese. Duc Lop is in the mountain jungles 125 miles northeast of Saigon. On Thursday, the enemy attacked there in force, partially overran the camp, but then pulled back yesterday under heavy air attack. Finally, the arrival of a South Vietnamese relief column ended the threat to the camp, at least for the moment. The Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington reports that General Eisenhower suffered a further increase of irritability of the heart during the early hours today, and that his condition remains critical. The medical center says the general continues to rest comfortably. On the New York Stock Exchange today, Dow Jones Industrials were up nearly 4 points. Nearly 10 million shares were traded. The New York Stock Exchange Index was up 8 cents. On the American Stock Exchange, 5 million shares were traded. The American Exchange Index was unchanged. A Chicago court has issued a temporary injunction against a wildcat strike by the city's bus drivers. The injunction orders the drivers not to interfere with other drivers who did not join in the walkout. The striking drivers, most of them Negro, want greater representation in their union. So far, the walkout, which began last night, has sharply limited service on the south side of the city, which is, of course, where the convention hall is located. Chicago cab drivers still remain on strike, the 10th day of their walkout, which has kept 80% of the city's cabs off the streets. Elevated and subway trains are reportedly running on schedule. About 7,500 regular Army troops have been brought to military bases around Chicago in case of violence during the Democratic Convention. Also, 5,600 National Guardsmen are on standby duty. 1,000 federal agents are guarding hotels and mingling with the crowds. And Chicago's police force, nearly 12,000 men, are on 12-hour shifts for the convention. We are very well guarded in this town. Leaders of the Yippies have sent a telegram to Secretary General U Thant of the United Nations, charging that law and order has broken down in Chicago and demanding that an impartial observer be sent here. Another group, the MOBS, the National Mobilization Committee to End the War in Vietnam, says it will march on Convention Hall with or without a parade permit when the Democrats begin balloting for their presidential nominee. The MOBS today compared themselves to freedom fighters in Czechoslovakia. In Chicago's Lincoln Park this afternoon, police arrested Thomas Hayden, coordinator of an organization protesting the Vietnam War. And when ABC cameraman Charles Ferris attempted to take pictures of the arrest, a policeman broke the lens of Ferris's camera. And the ABC sound man working with Ferris also was roughed up. Police in Lincoln Park would not say exactly what charge had been made against Hayden. Guest commentator Ralph Schoenstein has been surveying the Chicago scene for us. The mods, the rockers, the cops, and the pals. Here are his observations.
People are wondering why the Democratic Convention is so festive, why there's a smile on the face of every trooper, and the birdies are singing on the old barbed wire fence. The answer is that Mayor Richard Daley has thought of many gay touches to brighten Fort Chicago. For example, he has built lovely high fences around the slums so that delegates discussing poverty won't be distracted by the poor. However, one slum dweller told me that he likes the fences too because they block his view of the delegates. Mayor Daley has worked hard at this convention to please everyone from Lyndon Johnson to General Westmoreland. With the sure hand of a genial host, he has barred live television from the streets and roofs because he's well aware how television fosters violence. There are no bounds to the game that the mayor has given to Chicago. The order to shoot to kill has been changed to shoot to wound. For now is the time for all good cops to come to the aid of the party. The lampposts on Michigan Avenue have pictures of flowers, a nice concession to hay fever victims. And at the airport, I saw a baby wearing a hat that said Mayor Richard Daley and carrying a balloon that said Mayor Richard Daley. Only a check for diaper rash could have shown if the mayor was making use of all advertising space. A certain lunatic fringe of liberals, Negroes, Czechoslovakians, and anchormen says that Daley has suppressed freedom in Chicago just because he has stopped all outdoor meetings, convention parades, TV remotes, and sleeping in parks. But he has made the trains run on time. And he's a great foe of unemployment. He's already given out 60,000 jobs to the finest friends, fence builders, and airport babies around. So here's to you, Mayor Daley. In a time when we're all so disturbed by change, you're holding the line for 19th century government. This is Ralph Schoenstein in Gun City.
Frank Mankiewicz, former Kennedy aide who's now working for Senator McGovern, commented today on the tight security at Convention Hall. Mankiewicz says that wearing a Daley for President button is the best way to get through the police lines. I might say that we have one young man in our organization who for 2 days has been wearing a button bearing the name Spiro T. Agnew, and nobody has yet stopped him. So maybe the security is a bit remiss in some ways. Richard Nixon continued his holiday today on the little island in the Bahamas called Walker's Cay. Nixon will return shortly by yacht to his retreat at Key Biscayne near Miami. George Wallace, who celebrated his 49th birthday yesterday with his family at Disneyland, is resting in Los Angeles today. Tonight he speaks at a rally in Long Beach, and then he will fly to Phoenix, Arizona. In a moment, I'll have a comment on the convention. It is painful to say this about a national convention of either major party, but this gathering of the Democrats in the stockyards has about it an air of doom that seems unhappily appropriate to the surroundings. It is not just because there is division and disunity here. Democrats are always fighting among themselves, and at its best, the party is a patchwork of conflict and confusion that somehow usually evolves into a consensus and a common goal. That's not the way it is here now. Division and disunity are mild terms, too mild to be applied to this convention. Some of Senator McCarthy's supporters, when they talk about Hubert Humphrey, sound like followers of Joe McCarthy. Some of them, who call themselves dissenting Democrats, have full-page ads in the papers today saying, "We will not under any circumstances support Hubert Humphrey for president." Any circumstances presumably includes the likely election of Richard Nixon. I suggest that this sort of talk goes well beyond Nelson Rockefeller's pre-convention claim that Mr. Nixon could not win. What some Democrats are saying here is that unless they get their way, they, not the Republicans, will defeat the Democratic nominee. The front runner pathetically pleads for unity. Many of the others are preaching destruction. The rancor is too deep, the statements and charges too extreme to be glossed over on the last night of the convention, when traditionally victor and vanquished appear together on the platform embracing one another in political as well as physical unity. If that happens this week, even the most cynical politician in this hall ought to be repelled by what will be nothing less than a blatant display of hypocrisy. The balloons and the funny hats are here, of course, and there is the usual collection of kooks and oddballs who turn up at any convention. But this is no carnival. For the Democrats this year have lost the knack of disagreeing without being disagreeable. And in that sense, unfortunately, they are perhaps representative of the rest of the country. That's tonight's news and comment. I'm Frank Reynolds. Good night.